Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our final installment of the Hen Press Reading and Conversation series this season. I'm Monica Fernandez.
And I'm Toby Harper.
And we are unbelievably excited to bring this conversation about poetic form in the classroom to you this evening. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Toby and I are broadcasting from is the occupied and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tonga, and Kizh people. The Santa Monica Bay Audubon Society put together a fantastic page of information on the Tonga people, their history, their culture, and their practices. I highly recommend taking a look at their page and learning as much as you can about these incredible people. Tonight's event will take you into the minds of three incredible dynamic poets who will discuss how they teach poetry and poetic form in the classroom. To introduce everyone, please welcome back our sensational moderator, Jason Schneiderman. Hi, Jason.
Hi, I am Jason Schneiderman. I am coming to you from Brooklyn, from the unceded territory of the Lenape people.
All right. We'll just leave you to it, Jason, to do the intros, and we'll see you at the end of the show.
Thanks. So it is my pleasure to introduce Ron Koertge and Douglas Manuel. Douglas Manuel is going to read first, and I'm going to introduce him right now. Doug Manuel's formalism begins at the level of the syntax. I'm not quite sure how to explain this, but he is a formalist of the sentence, packing stresses tightly into his phrases as he wraps them across the line and stanza in a way that would make Gerard Manley Hopkins blush. When you listen to his poems, pay attention to the way that the staccato alternates with the slide and the way that the sound is echoing sense. Doug's formalism is distinctly American, not merely capturing the rhythms of speech, but elevating those rhythms into sculpture. Douglas Manuel was born in Anderson, Indiana. He received a BA in creative writing from Arizona State University and an MFA from Butler University. He is currently a Middleton and Dornsife Fellow at the University of Southern California, where he is pursuing a PhD in literature and creative writing. His poems are featured on Poetry Foundation's website and have appeared or are forthcoming in Ziziva, Pleiades, Poetry Northwest, the Los Angeles Review, Superstition Review, Rhino, North American Creek, the Chattahoochee Review, New Orleans Review, Cab Creek Review, and elsewhere. His first full-length collection of poems, Testify, was published by Hen Press in 2017 and won an IBPA Benjamin Franklin Award for Poetry. In 2018, he traveled to Egypt and Eritrea with the University of Iowa's International Writing Program to teach poetry. In 2020, he received the Dana Gioia Poetry Award and a fellowship from the Borchardt Foundation Center on Literary Arts to travel to San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas, Mexico to write. Please welcome Douglas. He's going to read for 8 minutes and then we'll move to Ron and then we'll move to our conversation. Doug.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. I just want to hear you talk about my work forever, so I sound way doper and way smarter than I am. I'm so happy to be here. Red Hens Say What? I'm so glad to be representing for this last talk in the series. So thank y'all so much. And thank you and much respect due to Ron. Every time I share the stage with him, I realize that I need to tighten up as a poet and just how amazing he is. And I know he's just going to destroy it afterwards. So I'm actually going to read from the new manuscript I'm working on entitled Trouble Funk. Testify has been out for a while, so I kind of get tired of reading from it. Plus, I'm really excited about this work. And the other thing that I'll say about this is thinking about our conversation and thinking about form. Oftentimes we think of just form as tradition, but also we can think of form as being constraints. And that was something that we had a great conversation about with Jason and Ellen a couple weeks back, of thinking about form as constraints. So with this project, I started out wanting each of the poems to just be 14 lines long and to at least have one physical scene in it. So I wanted a scene to occur and I wanted 14 lines. And that really kind of freed me up. And another constraint that I put is because Testify is so in the lyric first person I decided that I would have all the poems in Trouble Funk be a third person omniscient. So that was the other constraint. And so one of the beautiful things that we talked about in length with Jason and Ellen a couple weeks ago is that how constraints can actually emancipate you. And actually open things up. And so that kind of process happened for me by placing the constraints on myself for this manuscript. And I guess the other thing you need to know is that each poem is entitled a song that my father spun. He was a DJ in the 70s and the 80s. And yeah, so this pretty much Trouble Funk tells the story of the speaker of Testify's parents getting together. So I think that's it. Now with all that introduction, I'm just going to read straight through. Here we go. And I just pushed the timer, so I don't think we'll go too long over. Here we go. Let's get small. Same scream since the night before. She's locked herself in the bathroom. He's holding up the bathroom door with his back. Another job gone, the song of another woman all over his lips. Caught, she could taste it. She screams, he screams, their scream. She screams, he screams, their scream. Their scream, he screams, she screams. The same scream they began with. The same scream they'll end with. But really, it's older than that, deeper than that, and oh so very black. The same scream since the Middle Passage, since slavery, since Reconstruction, since Jim Crow, since the Great Migration, since redlining, since the Civil Rights Movement. So many screams slicing love. Music, the stitches. Forgiveness inside a drum. He walks to the record player. Puts on their song. The times 4/4, hard on the downbeat staccato. Something to dance to. Something to survive through. Something to die to. The bathroom door sighs open. A mouth full of silence. Go for your guns. 1977, the year of the Roots miniseries. They watch how Kunta won't be Toby. How he can make believe he won't need that foot. How he isn't afraid to lose it. When Damon ain't here in Denise's house eating her food, he lives in his van, his own mobile home, always nowhere to go, no real home since his stepdaddy told him to leave again. I'm going to paint the van green, he tells her, emerald and jade, something regal or royal, she interrupts, placing 2 fingers above his lips to shush him and smooth his mustache. Above their heads, adorning the wall, a velvet painting of a black woman birthing the universe from her skull, afro aglow with thoughts, galaxies ripe with rings, circling planets, beltways of stars lit as if they were paths leading to all the great nowheres they could never be. You know, you ain't gotta leave. You ain't gotta live in that raggedy ass van, she says, lighters, records, pipes, razors everywhere. Her living room all dark. Except for the glow from the TV illuminating the line from slavery to their very bodies. Still black, still not free, always needing to think on their feet, always needing to be ready to flee. Stop, look, listen to your heart. Denise's ears had always heard talk of wars. The Korean War. Why Uncle Cecil don't walk good and can feel the rain coming. Why he hears voices only the dog hears. Why he peers into the black evening sky. Why he burned the whole house down with a cigarette. The Vietnam War. Why everybody, well, almost everybody she knows somebody who ain't come back. Her senior year, there were so many funerals. TV showed flag-draped caskets. Denise knew Bobby didn't need to get high all the time until he came back from Vietnam. The war on drugs. Somebody said something about it at work when they were clocking in. Somebody said Nixon ain't playing no games. Denise didn't think of Damon and what he was slinging. Didn't think of what TT was, what Dion was, what Leon was, what JT was. Well, shit. Almost everybody was slanging how they made money. Well, she did, but not for too long because there used to be a war on poverty too. But that didn't last that long. All right, we're about halfway through. I think I'm going to read 2 more and then get out. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate this so much. And to read new work, always fun. All right. Your love doesn't mean anything to me. Damon doesn't remember how old he was when he saw his grandpa on the ground, hog-tied, the police laughing. This'll teach you, they said. Damon doesn't remember learning about the Klan, but he remembers the stories of crosses cutting the night sky open with their flames. He's seen the charred grass, black as the pupil of an eye. The first time he was called niggard, Damon remembers. The word hurt more than Tommy's fist colliding with Damon's lips for asking Amy, Tommy's sister, to be his Valentine. Sucking his bottom lip and swallowing the blood, Damon's anger sizzled the whole way to the principal's office. Whipped at school, and once he got home, Damon's mama made him get a switch. This'll teach you, she said. The last time Damon talked smart to the cops, the barrel of the gun was warm against his face, as if the cop had just shot somebody. This will teach you, he said. All right, I think this will be the last one, my dear friends. Thank you guys so much again. Yeah, I think this will be, we'll go this way. What do the lonely do at Christmas? Shout out to the emotions. At first, it was just a rumor, something far away and invisible, but on the way, like the hand of God, his wrath, retribution, justice. At first, it seemed like a good idea, a way to make the party never stop, a way to keep dancing, to keep the song going, 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 going. The record spinning, 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 spinning. The money coming in. The money got so big, so fast, so big, so fast. There was so much money so fast, it wouldn't last. At first, it was so very fun, but then there were guns. The guns got so big, so very fast. At first, it was fun, but then there were guns. The guns got big, so very fast. There were so many guns, and the guns brought blood, the blood, the blood. There was so much blood. The blood spread so fast. The bodies, the blood. The blood spread so fast. Addicted, he wasn't. At first, it was just one rock. It was just one rock. Thank you guys so very much.
Thank you. I just poured water all over my desk. Thank you so much, Douglas. That was fantastic. Thank you very, very much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Ron Koertge. I am tempted to call Ron a kind of collage artist, a poet and novelist who never lets anything drop, who finds a place in his work for what might otherwise be dismissed as juvenile, frivolous, silly, or lowbrow. Ron's loved poems, which he has been publishing longer than I have been alive, place pressure on those distinctions between highbrow and lowbrow, recycling kitsch into art with a sense of humor and an eye towards form that is not merely at the level of the line and stanza, but at the level of genre and oeuvre. If you need a detail that illuminates the whole, Ron lives in a house that is from the original film version of Halloween, the house where Jamie Lee Curtis manages to survive the attacks of her younger brother, and all year long, he welcomes pilgrims with pumpkins who come to pay homage to the film franchise. Ron Koertge teaches at Hamline University in their low residency MFA program for children's writing. His most recent book, Vampire Planet, is a collection of new and selected poems. His other works include Sex World from Red Hen Press, Fever from Red Hen Press, Indigo from Red Hen Press, Lives, Knives, and Girls in Red Dresses from Candlewick Press, and The Ogre's Wife from Red Hen Press. Koertge also writes fiction for teenagers, including many novels and novels in verse, The Primstone Journals, Stoner and Spaz, Strays, Shakespeare Bats Cleanup, Shakespeare Makes the Playoffs, and Cold Town Jesus. All were honored by the American Library Association, and 2 have received PEN Awards. He's the recipient of grants from the NEA and the California Arts Council, and has poems in 2 volumes of Best American Poetry. He lives in South Pasadena, California, and I am really excited to welcome Ron Koertge.
Thanks, Jason. Very nice to be here. I love reading with Doug. I love seeing Jason. I like seeing, Toby and Monica, who I don't see in person often enough. I was at a writers' conference maybe 2 decades ago, west of here, or east of here, I mean. And after, I was the poet, there was a prose writer, there was a dramatist, there was a few more of us. We're all up on the podium with a microphone, and it's Q&A time. And the guy stood up and he said, I don't see why you all make writing sound so hard. When I write, it just flows out of me. And the woman next to me said, that just makes me want to get a mop. So for me, formalism makes it not necessary to get the mop. So I'm going to read these poems of mine. I want to read a sestina, which will take up most of my 8 minutes probably. And then I have some couplets if I have time, and I have a formal, not a sonnet, but three quatrains in meter and rhyme. So let's start with the sestina. The title of it is A New Hardy Boys Mystery. I've got some miles on me, as you can tell. Now, the Hardy Boys were books that I read when I was younger, like a year ago. And if not everybody knows who the Hardy Boys are, the poem explains this along the way. And I'm sure everyone knows what a sestina is. 6 words at the end of every line, 6 lines per stanza, and you can only use those words over and over. And just for the record, because it might be fun, the words are hometown, sleuthing, girls, mystery, door, shadow. Here begins my 8 minutes. We're in Bayport, the boys' hometown. Dark Frank, fair Joe, sleuthing is everything. Who cares about girls? First and foremost, the mystery. Flicking torches, marks on a door, a hooded hawk, a crimson shadow. Night sounds, shades drawn, shadows fall across their hometown. Every citizens bolt their doors, but nothing keeps the boys from sleuthing. They're hot for any mystery. They can't be bothered with girls, though Frank has noticed girls wearing lipstick and eyeshadow, decked out in skimpy mysteries, lighting up his hometown, getting in the way of sleuthing. He doesn't want to go through that door. Thank God, another riddle to a door. Now they can stop thinking about girls. Okay, when they're through sleuthing, maybe it gets a little old, shadowing bad guys all over their charming hometown, solving every single mystery. But there are other kinds of mysteries like Ava and Emma sunning next door. And suddenly it's like their hometown is boiling over with girls coming boldly out of the shadows, teasing them about sleuthing. Ava and Emma take over sleuthing, guiding them toward a different mystery, leading them into the shadows, turning out lights, locking a door, telling them to not think of other girls, much less their stupid hometown. Joe and Frank are stymied. Are these beautiful hometown girls shadowy doors leading to mysteries no amount of sleuthing can ever solve? I love the sestina. Almost all poets write them. Almost all of them are failures or disasters or embarrassing things that you wouldn't show anybody. This one, not bad. Maybe I have one other that's not bad. And I probably have written 25. And so, where 23 of them are. I'm gonna read the couplets to you. The title of this is These Couplets Are Killing Me, and it's in quotes. And the little kicker underneath says, overheard in a seminar. I started to write this to see how couplets could kill, and it was too easy. That is, they're too difficult. So then I concentrated on the killing part. And there are 8 of them, I think. And here are the couplets. The hired assassin takes the bus. He hates what seems superfluous. Not for him a savings bond or Lexus with a built-in blonde. Eyes down, he seems almost devout, modest as a boyish scout. A pretty girl with mermaid hair makes all the other riders stare. He pretends to be asleep. Silently, he numbers sheep. A stop or two, and he arrives in his pocket, several knives. This is the part he likes the most, the query of his baffled host, the way he goes down on his knees, his face as white as cottage cheese. Tomorrow, in the early times, a longer list of unsolved crimes. And finally, for my formal ones, this poem is called $15 an Hour. I started to work on it a couple of years ago when I was reading about women who work downtown in the hotels, who made the beds. If you call housekeeping, one of these women would come up and empty your ashtray or whatever. I tried writing it with a more political slant, but I'm not good at that. We don't know why, and we won't delve into it now. But it just didn't work. And then I tried third person, and then it didn't work. And these are all free verse attempts. And then I thought, the repetitive work that these women do, the same beds every day, the same ceilings, the same waste cans, the same problems, this calls for a limit. And what it turns out, and when I started to write in form with these 3 stanzas, it looked like a bed on the screen, right? It was that way. And I thought, I'm on to something here. What I boiled down to was not to use the women who were working downtown, but a single woman working for a client who was cleaning house for her. And this is in her voice. And it begins with, I go in at 8:30, and the title is $15 an hour. I go in at 8:30 and read all her notes. I start with the stains, the black ink and red wine, then whites from the colors like sheep from the goats, towels go in the dryer, silk goes on the line. Clothes tell me their secrets. I know where they've been. This morning, I picked up her pretty chemise that smelled like a stranger's mysterious skin and held to my ear. I could hear her say, please. I shouldn't be talking. I'm not really a spy. I do housework for money, but I know what I know. I bleach and I iron, let sleeping dogs lie, shirts all on hangers, sheets white like snow. Those are my formal poems. And like Doug, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks to Red Hen, thanks to the grant from, I believe, the NHA, the National Humanities for the Arts. Okay.
I think it's NEH. It's actually the National Endowment for the Humanities is funding us today. I feel like I should give them a shout out for being generous to us and bringing us together today. And thank you both. Those were wonderful readings, very different and really kind of giving a sense of how capacious formal thinking in poetry is and how many kind of ways in form can take. And I wanted to start the conversation by asking you sort of the same question, but in 2 different versions. One is, what is your favorite thing about teaching form? Like just in the classroom, what do you like the best? Or do you have a particular story about your favorite moment? Do you have a favorite kind of classroom moment of teaching form to students?
Doug, you want to start or you want me to start? I'll start.
I want you to start. Always. You speak first, my dear friend. Drop that knowledge.
I like teaching form because when I go into the classroom, I used to teach at night from 7 to 10. I had a lot of time with these guys. And when I go in on the first night and I tell them how many forms I want, and I made the list. A sonnet, a villanelle, a ghazal, sapphics, blank verse, a ballad, couplets, sestina, and pantoum. And what I like about that is when I say that, the blood drains from their faces and 4 or 5 of them bolt from the room. So I have left, like a core of people who are, willing to at least try. In the rules of the class, they do not have to write these forms well, but they have to write them. So that's what I like. I like shocking them on the first night and seeing what I have left. But I have to say, they look at me like I'm some quixotic killjoy, come into the room to make their lives more difficult, because they often say to me when I ask, what are you in here for? What's on your mind? What's up with the poetry? And they often say, I just want to express myself. And then I say, you can do that, of course. And in the forms, you will do that in a way that will probably surprise and we hope delight you.
No, I love that. And I think kind of on a similar thing about wanting to kind of let the students know what the lay of the land is. My favorite thing is it's a shortcut, right? Like they know the rules. They already have some kind of idea about what's popping off. So like if you say, we're going to write haiku today, like they're already thinking about counting syllables. If you're going to say a sonnet, they're already thinking, about rhyme schemes, et cetera, et cetera. But then the cool thing is then to show them that form is way more than that too. That's where I like that, like using like kind of traditional verse as the starting point, and then to talk about kind of more, varied relationships towards form, other ways to enter kind of formal conversations and formal discussions. So I like that it's kind of that place to start, and then being like, but now let's talk about the line, and let's talk about breaking with the breath. But now, like, let's also talk about breaking with the intent of multiple meaning making. So then talk about, so that we want these lines to rhyme, or we want this many beats per line. But what if we throw all that out? What's holding us down? What is form then? So that's where I kind of get really excited about it when it comes to kind of my favorite moment.
And this might ask you to kind of continue in that same vein. I was thinking about the anaphora, Doug, in your poem, This Will Teach You, right? I mean, that kind of idea that we often have of educational sites as being stressful, as being scary, as sometimes being violent. And Ron, you were kind of bringing this up with the idea that some of the students are scared, right? That the form comes up and it's terrifying. It can even be used as a kind of winnowing, as a sort of way to sort of like separate the serious from the unserious, or the dedicated from the undedicated. And I kind of wanted to ask about that approach with students. Like, do you encounter a lot of resistance? Do you encounter, or I guess one way to ask would be, do you encounter a lot of resistance? And the other way to ask it would be, what do you see students, how do you see their attitude towards form change as the semester progresses? What do you see, or as the workshop progresses, what do you see as the difference between how students kind of understand form at the beginning and how they understand form at the end?
Well, I mean, in the biblical sense, the scales fall from their eyes. They see the value of it. They have way more fun working with form than they thought they would have. And they say so. And they say even, this isn't a very good sonnet, or these, haiku have too many frogs and too many leaves. But they say, I never thought I would be able to, I never thought I would be happy fooling around with these kinds of forms until I did it. And now I kind of love it. So that's one of the answers. One more thing, I also read them something from Tim Steele, a new formalist, guy used to teach at Cal State LA. He says, and I read this to them, at some point, I employ traditional instruments of verse because I love the symmetries and surprises they produce, especially meter, which allows me to render feelings and ideas more flexibly and precisely than I otherwise could. And if they remember that, or any part of it, they'll use those words back on me. And I've had students say, I'm way more flexible than I thought I would be. Because basically, a lot of students at the community college poetry class, their mantra is, I went out in the forest and had deep feelings. and then they want to write about their deep feelings, and I'm just asking them to write about them, you know, in a box.
No, and I think where I'll jump in on that is one of the things for my students is I think at the end they realize that form and tradition is way more than just the Anglo-American or the Western tradition. Like I'm always blending in forms from other communities, from other ethnic groups, from other meaning-making systems. So, you know, doing, and I might say this incorrectly, but Lanaways from Afghani tradition, doing hip-hop poems, doing blues poems, just expanding the idea of like what form is. Again, that's something that I'm going to come back to again and again, and kind of stepping into those different forms of thinking, oh, this isn't just Shakespeare. And then also letting them know of just formal gestures that are already innate in them. Like you go to church every Sunday, yo, a sermon, that can be a form, yo, of showing them different ways. That argument style that you use to be able to get the car keys, that's kind of similar to a sonnet, homie. Let's talk about it. And so like to talk to the students in that fashion, to let them know that these were just, you know, kind of methods in making meaning, and that they're available, and that you see this shit all the time. It's just that you didn't have the coded language for it. So I think that's kind of the most exciting part for me, is just kind of almost this act of translation and application that happens through teaching, of being like, yo, you already seen this somewhere in your life, and this is what you can do with it. And, you know, I think that's kind of what, you know, to go back to Marilyn Nelson's old essay back in the day, was trying to say with owning the masters, you know, is that you can like find yourself and own these masters to make meaning in places that necessarily didn't include you or would include bodies that are like you.
Yeah. Yeah. I told a class, I use this, you know, more than once, of course, but I'll write on the board a line like, I went downtown and bought myself a hat. That's a perfect iambic line. And then I'll read some more to them, and you know, at some point, some student will say, "Oh my God, I've been speaking iambic pentameter most of my life," and it's just boom, you know. And they kind of love that, and then they hear it all over the place, and they'll come to class, and I'll say, "I just heard a guy speaking a little iambic over in the cafeteria," and then it's suddenly, "Oh my, you know, this is everywhere."
I often have students who will say something along the lines of, you know, well, this isn't what I would normally do. This isn't how I would normally write. If I'm sort of in a curt mood, I'll just say, well, that's school. Yes, that's what school is. You do. Yes, like if you were going to do it anyway, you wouldn't need to go to school for it. But what I do find is that it opens things up. And that doing the unexpected actually kind of leads on to these kinds of epiphanies and discoveries. And, you know, both at the class level and at the individual level, both were like, you know, because if everyone's trying to write a sestina, everyone knows how hard it is. So when everyone is reading you know, if you bring in the moose, or if you bring in, you know, whatever your favorite sestina is, the students are kind of like, "Arr." But then once they're doing it, then they go back and they're like, oh, right, okay, that's, now I understand.
And that's the most exciting thing, right? Is the communal aspect. That's the thing that we kind of sleep on. Like when, you know, we're talking about canon reformation, where we're talking about tradition, and we're talking about, you know, when you come from a marginalized, minoritized space and thinking about tradition, is that like we forget how communal it is to be like struggle with everybody. All of us homies are struggling with this sestina, and we can't get it fucking right, you know? And like thinking about that and knowing that you're struggling like another poet has struggled, and like so many other poets have struggled, to know that like other poets have struggled with making this couplet just rhyme at the end of this sonnet. I just want it to work. And that's, I think, something that's also really, really empowering, that even somebody like me who doesn't always like lean hard into saying, you know, making demarcations like I'm a formalist, or somebody's you know, a new formalist or semi-formalist, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's the thing that I find kind of really empowering about form, besides the paradox of the emancipation through the constraints, is this idea of community. Like I'm trying some shit, like when we do a ghazal, you know, we're trying stuff that people were, you know, Persian people were doing in like the 10th century. Shut the front door. How often do you get to do that? Yeah. How often do you get to do something like that? Seriously.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a moment. I just want to say that I think that when you bring it to the communal, that sort of paradox of the constraint is freeing, which I think often makes us sound a little crazy, or it makes us sound like we're sort of not that we, that we're into BDSM, but, like we kind of want to be tied up, which we, I do on Sunday nights, but,
we all.
But it makes it clear that when you understand that as a community, we're kind of working through a set of constraints, that gets us to a kind of freedom. It's because it creates a shared understanding, and then it brings us into a kind of space in which we're free because we see each other working through the exact same constraint. So I'm sorry, but thank you, Douglas. That was really, really helpful. Ron, did you want to?
Oh, I was just thinking that I bring in the Robert Frost poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and I read it to them, and I try to get them to get away from thinking about what the poem means so much. Remember the last two lines, miles to go before I sleep, and he repeats it. You know what a class will do with that? They want to know if it's about suicide. Miles to go before I sleep, miles to go before I sleep. It's a very portentous repetition. So I show them that the reason that line repeats is the rhyme scheme in that poem is A-A-B-A, whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch the woods fill up with snow. So he had three dominant rhymes and an orphan rhyme. In the second stanza, the orphan rhyme becomes the dominant line, right? He does it again, he does it in the third stanza. If he didn't repeat that last line twice, he would still be writing that poem. Right? You can't get out of it. So rather than imagining Frost thinking, oh, I'm going to repeat this line and make it more portentous if possible, he just wants to get out. So they see then what form can do and how it has to be handled to keep it from bullying them and pushing them around. Right? And it works every time. They love that poem.
I'm always trying to explain to students that poets are actually really literal. Like they think that, oh, sleep, it must be more than sleep. It must be, and it's like, no, he's tired.
Out there with his horse.
He's really tired.
Get my ass home. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Do you find that your student, I guess this is sort of a hard question to ask, but how is your own relationship to form different than your students? And not just in terms of kind of having done it longer, but what do you see about the way that you kind of learned form and approached form, and how is it kind of different or the same as what you see in the classroom as your students kind of learn this?
Well, I see students doing, maybe by chance, maybe by design, things that I haven't thought about doing and would like to try. I see them making what you think of as exquisite mistakes. They're rhyming, they're looking up, at the rhyme was, what's that thing? Rhyme zone, on your computer. You don't have to read this little book anymore. And when they discovered in Rhyme Zone that you can bring up half rhymes, part rhymes, slant rhymes, makes them go crazy. And then they love it so much. And then we talk a little bit about how full rhyme is always melodious and part rhyme is a little harsher. And then they start thinking, is this a good place for a half rhyme? Because here's a line. This isn't the same thing, but it's very close. Here's a line in perfect meter. The wounded soldier staggered toward the house. The wounded soldier staggered toward the house. And I put it on the board and I ask him what's wrong. Literally wrong with that line. And it takes them a while, but somebody will always get it. And the answer is the line is too even for what the content is talking about. Mm-hmm. The wounded soldier is staggering. That line should stagger a little. And then they start seeing what they can do by turning feet around, not perfect iams, and matching sometimes what they're talking about with how they're writing about it. With some of my students' idea that they can become technicians of new formalism really makes them feel powerful. They're doing stuff that nobody they know is doing, right? Except the people in the class, this community. And they'll come in and they'll say to their pals, nobody understands this poem. Am I wrong about this? Or what do you think before the class starts? What do you think about this? And they're in this together. And they're now, head and shoulders above a lot of other people.
Yeah, that's such a gift to give them. That's such a gift. And, I think that I remember that kind of watershed moment of realizing the connection between form and content, and Jason knows I say all the time, because I said it during the meeting, that Levertov quote about form being a revelation of content, or, how many ways can we do it? Form being an extension of content, somebody else said, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just love that idea. Jason, for me, when it comes to like the distance between what my students know about form and me, I think that they're way less suspicious than I am. I think because of Instagram and like kind of the commodification of getting poems like has a quick picture, they're like, and the rise of some of my contemporaries and younger poets who like write in form or have at least kind of like the kind of haunting of a form in every poem. Like they're not afraid of the hard rhyme. I remember when I was in undergrad classes at ASU and I would throw a hard rhyme in a poem, I'd be so afraid and ashamed. And like, I think also because of hip hop, to be all the way real, and like, hip hop being, one of the most valuable and, reproduce cultural artifacts like that happening in the world, where people are just hearing mad rhymes and clever rhymes, like rhymes that we would never even think about, like in the Western canon, especially when you add in half rhymes and part rhymes and slant rhymes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and changed rhymes and transmorphic rhymes. When you add in all those. So I think they're way less suspicious. I think like I came of age and, this is so sad to be old enough to where like I know that my generation is different, but like I think that we were like so empowered by free verse that like we were like, whenever a poem had any kind of meter, we're like, oh my God, what are you doing? And it also was kind of caught up in the political stakes of the moment. It seemed natural from what I could see as an undergrad. I felt like that conservative people were traditional formalists and liberal people were for organic verse and for free verse. So I think my students are way less suspicious, which also makes them be way more open-minded. I think like I had undergrad Dud had little time to learn how to write a sonnet. He wanted to learn a blues poem. He wanted to learn, how to like have dope hip hop bars so he can give you a fresh 16. But my contemporary poet students don't have that. I think they're ready to jump in. They're not as suspicious.
That's been my experience as well. And I think we were undergraduates not too far apart, but I remember there was someone—
You older than me. Don't do me like that, Jason. You older than me.
I lied?
I'm messing with you.
Yeah, that's right. But in those 90s, can I get there in the 90s? I should have looked this up. There was—
I was still in high school and in middle school and high school in the 90s, Jason. That's all I'm gonna say. But I'm not gonna lose your thought.
So you're just so wise. I assume that people in the 90s, there was a very specific fear of form, and kind of what you're saying about the sort of politicization that sonnets are conservative and free verse is progressive, which was interesting because slam was sort of in this other constellation, right? That like slam, where all of these formal techniques were in constant use and really being developed, were sort of like, it was just sort of on another planet, and a planet I really like to go to. But I remember that, someone would like write a sonnet and hide all of the rhymes, and then at the end would be like, well, that was a sonnet. And then be like, see, you missed all the rhymes. And it was like, why would you do that? But I know with my own formal education, and this is kind of the next thing I want to ask you, it was I think it was much harder for me than it was for my students. I remember Aga Shahid Ali at NYU wanted us to work in meter, and he would assign all these meters, and no matter what I did, it was iambic pentameter. Like no matter how hard I worked at class the next day, I had written iambic pentameter. And now I'm amazed because my students, with like an hour of training on rhythm, will be identifying, all kinds of meters and like really, with substitutions, with this really sophisticated ways. And I was just wondering, and I guess you've already said that, that there's something a little bit more receptive about it. That there's a way in which the ear of people who came up a generation or two after me are more receptive to it. That their ears are better trained for those kinds of formal features. And so so the next thing I did want to ask you was about your own formal training, like kind of like what did you set yourself? Did you have teachers who kind of insisted on it? Did you come to it on your own? Were you sort of paying attention to debates and then kind of entering on one side or another?
Well, I came to it on my own because I'm probably older than both of you guys put together. Because I was in grad school with Jerry Laughlin in 1972, which goes back a ways.
No,
Not 72?
No.
I started teaching 65. Oh, 62.
62.
62.
Bianca did you wrong for that.
I know she held up the calendar. And
Yeah, seriously.
I didn't have creative writing teachers at the University of Arizona. I had Jerry Laughlin, who was a friend of mine, and who introduced me to the little magazine scene, beginning with the Wormwood Review. I was just very happy to get away from reading, Koertge or something, somebody who I thought was difficult and ponderously taught in a ponderous manner, and often, what does the poem mean? Not how does it mean it, which is a much more interesting question. Will get us there. So what happened to me is Jerry introduced me to the little magazine scene, and I'm a funny guy, and I have an odd sense of humor, and I like satire. So I published a lot of poems in little magazines. And by little, I mean ephemeral. I mean magazines with the lives of fruit flies. One issue and they're gone, right? There came a point, though, where that ran out. Time changed, styles changed. And I thought, I don't want to keep doing this, or I can't keep doing this. The one thing that wasn't as much fun. And I went back and taught myself to be a newish formalist, to carry myself through. One thing I do not want to do, like when I read, I never read too long. I always want people wanting more. I want to make them laugh and cry at the same time. And I'll take any tool that I can to get that done. And in some cases, it's paying a lot more attention to the way the line moves and where the rhymes are. I used to have an exercise for people in class who would push back on me about the sonnet. So I would have them use the rhyme word as the second last word in the sonnet. And it was just like, oh, baby, thanks for this assignment, because it just woke them up again.
Nice. No, that's so awesome, man. So like the guzzle, right? So
Yeah.
The hardcore one. I love it. For me, I think in high school and in middle school and elementary, just like everybody else, just the natural iambic pentameter was just so omnipresent that, like, of course it was there. But then I remember, like, first, the kind of poems that I first kind of gravitated to when I was young, would be like Langston Hughes, or would be somebody even like Nikki Giovanni. And I remember thinking, well, shit, that's a different rhythm. That's a different rhythm, and that rhythm sounds like my auntie at home, and that rhythm sounds like people around the way. So that was kind of my first kind of thoughts, is like noticing the difference. And then by the time I got to undergrad, the first book, I told Jason, I was joking because Jason's knowledge is so deep that I had to book up before, to come on here. So the first one from back in the day, this is back in the day, I remember getting this book in undergrad from Becky and Fritz Goldberg. Shout out to Becky, and if Becky is anywhere, I love Becky. And so, yeah, that was the first time that I realized all of the forms that were available to me. Like, again, I didn't know that there were that many. And, even though this book is very dated, I got to give Annie Finch and Catherine mad props, because there's so many forms from all over the world. Like, I was able to see myself and people from communities like me in this. And I think that really, really means a lot. And then after that, I kind of didn't really get that much more until grad school. And then I remember Chris Forehand talking about a book this simple, just Rules of the Dance.
Yeah, Mario.
And it was just like, oh, and that was the first time that I really heard iambic pentameter. Pretty much I always just cheated. Like, I would be like, oh, I get it. It's going to be a stress afterwards. Okay. I never really heard it. And for some reason, the way that, Oliver's always been able to talk about, rest in power, of course, complex ideas in a very digestible way. And so I just remember, like, and then reading again and being like, oh shit, there it is, that da-dum that these white professors and teachers have been talking about forever. Yeah. And it was just really crazy, like that kind of moment. And then other than that, I think, since then, I've read this book again and again. I was looking at this earlier today. And I think now, though, the most important book when I'm teaching is Robert Hass's The Little Book of Form. I really like the way that this deals with like organic form. So I think for me, I definitely am still debating if I'm really going to teach myself to like be a hardcore formalist. Like, Ron, I have much respect for you in so many ways, and just knowing that you just decided at that stage in your career to just learn all of that, like, inspires me. I've thought about that a lot, about like what a whole text of formal work would look like in my hand. But thus far, I don't think I've really taught myself as much as I should.
I wrote a whole book of, do we know how to pronounce ghazal? Is it ghazal?
So Shahid was very insistent on pronouncing it ghazal. Mm-hmm. But I corrected someone once who said ghazal, and they told me that in Arabic it's ghazal, and in Urdu it's ghazal. So you actually have like a free, you have a pretty wide range of pronunciations if you want to. Shahid was really insistent on ghazal, so I'll always stick with ghazal. But it's in so many
that's
languages.
What we're doing. If Shahid said that's what we're doing.
But I'm not going to correct anyone else ever again, because that did not go. I was
all I was going to say was I wrote an entire book. Every poem in the book was a ghazal. Reddy Hen did it. It was called Indigo. And, for those of you who are listening, that was not a good career move. People who saw the book literally said to me, "This doesn't sound like you. This is not like you. This is a different thing. What are you up to?" And if I would reply to them, I would just say, "I'm just fooling around." I'm just fooling around, because there's so many things that I've written where I've gotten like you mentioned the flash fiction of Sex World. I wrote Sex World in 3 months. I wrote Indigo in 2. Wow. I wrote a ghazal every day, for 2 months. And then because I was it got a little tedious, then I would do what I just said about the sonnet. I would put the keyword second to last, or I would half rhyme all the way down so that they look the same, but they're not the same. And I swear to God, I came away from that exercise with enormous new regard for what you can do with those sorts of lines, because the ghazal, every couplet is by itself, can stand alone, but it's still connected to the rest of it. It was really, really a wonderful exercise. And there's very little to lose in poetry. What's going to happen to me? I'm not going to publish these. Okay, next time.
And the ghazal is really interesting because of the way, the rules were known in English in the 1920s. Like, you can find formal ghazals from like the 1920s and earlier. But because of the free verse translations in the 1960s of Ghalib, most notably by Adrian Rich, from the 60s forward, people kind of just thought of the ghazal as couplets that didn't connect. And then Shahid brought back all of these rules, which had already been known, but had somehow sort of been lost. And so now the ghazal kind of, I do think it's really interesting that the ghazal kind of exists in these, sort of 2 versions. One as a form that only has a kind of semantic concern that and a lot of, I would sort of, there are too many free verse ghazals that I like to sort of like dismiss the form. But then, Shahid, and Shahid, the real ghazals, right? He was very insistent that those were fake ghazals. But it is a really interesting thing that now in English and in the rest of, in many parts of the world, it's a sung form. And the distinction between singing, song lyrics, and spoken poetry goes back to really the 1500s. And so the ghazal is this really interesting form because it has, in English, it has kind of like this multiplicity. And then globally, it sort of continues to have this kind of different set of meanings depending on who you're speaking to. And yet it's always a ghazal, right? There's something recognizable about that structure that we can all kind of come back to.
They're very electric. I really like the energy in those things. I like jumping from couplet to couplet. I like doing I could do anything that I wanted to do. And I even did some of those. Aren't you supposed to put your name in the last
In the
couple?
last one. Yeah.
I did that for a long time. I changed my name. I was Ron. I was Rob. I was Juan. I thought that was funny. And I would just do anything that I wanted. So I had all of these variations in this, you know. And when I was done with that, I didn't want any more guzzles for a while. I'm done with you guys. But now I've kind of come back around.
Yeah, I also, I mean, and what you were saying about different community, Douglas, about different communities and different spaces. And I do kind of want to talk a little bit about how the dum of the I am differs significantly based on your accent, region, dialect, mode of speaking.
Yeah.
But I also want to say with the Ghazal that I think that one of the reasons that the Ghazal, I think the Sestina became very important to American writers because it was a way to have form without rhyme. And when people were really suspicious of rhyming, the Sestina was kind of there to sort of let them have their form, but not that kind. And the Ghazal, I think, is a really important form because it lets you out of linearity. That almost every other Western mode, meditation, monologue, argument, they're very focused on kind of starting at the beginning and a linear progression to some kind of conclusion. And the Ghazal demands that I compare it to a broken mirror in an essay that I wrote, that it demands that you approach the same thing from multiple different positions. And so it demands that you refuse the kind of linearity that's the foundation of, you know, kind of Enlightenment thinking.
Yeah.
Now, I love the phrase you used a couple of weeks ago when you said that it's prismatic. Say it for me. Yes, there it is. There it is. My phonics is always in first grade. You go. Yeah, but you said that a couple of weeks ago, and I've actually said it 3 times since then. So your ears should have been itching, my dear friend. I think the Ghazal is the form when I think about like if I'm going to step into formal verse or closed verse or received forms. I always think the Ghazal's a place that I would start. And I'm also very attracted to the idea of blues poems as well. And I have a friend who works with my dear friend, Michelle Britton Rosado, a great, awesome poet. Please Get White, Can It Be Tenderness, her first text. But yeah, she talks about the pen tune all the time. And just, again, another form that also has a history that also, depending on which time in history that you tune into it, of which kind of version that you'll get from it. And so I like it, but I think one of the things that we can kind of land on with this is repetition. Because something that I always tell my students all the time is that all form is repetition. If something repeats, then we have something stable. And then, you know, I talk about like our bodies are just being cells repeating, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why like I'm really into, as you pointed out, Jason, like anaphora and such, like I'm really just into any kind of modes that like repeat again. And so when we look at the Harlem Renaissance poets, when we look at Dunbar, when we look at like the Black tradition, so much of it is like, and the blues tradition, so much of it is steeped in just repetition. When we look at, you know, chants, which of course is also, you know, married to the Black tradition as well as when we're going, you know, down to New Orleans and such, like that's also all about repetition. So that's the kind of stuff I like kind of lean in when I'm teaching form to go all the way there instead of duration of pitch, because as you were saying, that kind of stuff is so culturally biased. Like, again, I didn't hear iambic pentameter until I was like grown. And not because I got like all A's through all my English classes. And it was literally just like, I didn't hear it because didn't nobody, even if I had been talking like that, it didn't sound like my people's. It didn't sound like my people's. It was like stress heavy, you know, as you talked about with my writing is way more stress heavy. Like the spondy happens in Black speech and, you know, African-American vernacular way more than the I am happens. And so like to like have something like that, to have those kind of meaning making systems and sonic tools like taught to me would have gave me more access. So I usually try to start with repetition, start with rhyme, those kind of things instead of kind of duration and pitch, because it does kind of feel, again, barring some communities out.
Yeah, and I always emphasize that it's in your voice already, that and that a lot of what we have put in place in that kind of like weird 1500s moment is for a very kind of British voice, which has a quite different distinction between the loud and the soft syllables. Right, that American voices are far more mellifluous and kind of have this kind of much broader tone, whereas British voices are going to hit it in a very different way, right? But this is true across American dialect and accents. And so, in terms of kind of one of the things that I always try to do is start with the students' own voices. That whatever it is that you're bringing to the class, that's what you're writing in. We do have a question. We have been asked if we could talk about Nate Mackey's double trio.
Well, Doug better do this.
Lord have mercy. And as if I can do Mackey's work justice. I mean, I think what it's going for is, again, reaching for rhythms and sonic patterns that are, outside of the Western canon. So it's reaching back towards the African West tradition. And I know that it kind of works in this kind of two kind of falling stanza pattern. But outside of that, the thing that I'll say to it is I just know it's, again, this kind of reaching as minoritized and marginalized bodies do often for just another tradition to sing it. Because again, the songs that are usually of the Western tradition, shout out to Adrian Rich, the books didn't have our fucking names in them, homie. So looking for books that had our names in them. And, I think that's one of the things that when I think of Mackey's work and I think about the Muse series that excites me the most, is that it's like kind of creating a new site for us to find our history and our culture for, and somewhere that's always been there, in those Western African myths, that I think it would impoverish us to forget, just like great poetry does, has that old white guy Frost told us a couple times.
Yeah, I do want to. I definitely am not qualified to jump on this unprepared, but I do want to say that I think there's something really interesting that happens in classrooms, because when work is assigned, right, that there's often a kind of okay, so you have to figure out what is good about this, right, because it's been assigned to you. Whereas when you're in the workshop, we're often kind of starting with the question of what would make this better. And so it's often, I think, really sort of disorienting for students to kind of go back and forth between these two modes of thinking. But one of the things I do notice is that people, the familiar is always a kind of easier way in. And if you have a kind of recognition, you feel, and those rhythms are familiar, that they come from a community that you're inside of, there's something really exciting and sparking and productive about it. And when they're not, I think that one of the hardest things to develop is sort of the ability to stay with until it reveals itself, not to kind of toss out and say, oh, well, that's not familiar to me. This doesn't work for me. I don't know what's going on here, but to kind of stay with that. And I do think that often I feel like teaching form, because there are so many times when people sort of get to the other side of it, that it doesn't make sense at the beginning, but once the rules have been explained, that there's an other side, that can actually teach that way of kind of staying with the unfamiliar until it begins to yield something that you do kind of feel inside of.
Yeah, no, I can dig it. Yeah, no, I think that is true, that it and I think that's poetry in general, right? That if you go slow, that you can be rewarded, which is something that is something that, I'm an elder millennial, if you will. And yeah, that I think that us and the Zers don't think that much about, we want everything right now. I want my news curated. I want everything, I want all my likes right here. And then I can only look at the stuff that I think is dope right here instantly. If I ever fucking wonder, I find out right now, you know what I mean? So I think that's the other kind of lesson of just poetry in general. Is to go slow and be rewarded for that. So I can totally feel you there.
And it's a really interesting thing that the distinction between the anthology, right, that kind of gives you one person's perspective, and in some ways can be really powerful, because if you have an expert who's putting together a really comprehensive catalog, that can be something that you can't find anywhere else. But then sort of the immediacy of the internet means you can find whatever you're looking for, but you can't find what you're not looking for. Whereas an anthology, a lot of the ways in which those books developed, they meant that you found things you weren't looking for. And that kind of serendipity is often kind of lost in some of our more internet-y approaches.
Well, that's what rhyme was for. If you search for rhymes, you find things that you weren't looking for. It's just a wonderful surprise. The simplest kind of basic sonnet. Yeah, it's just that's why they're partly so wonderful.
And I think that we've talked around, the famous Lord quote this whole time. And I think, anytime minoritized bodies or marginalized bodies are talking about form, that we have to think about this, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And, and of course, I've read kind of contemporary clapbacks like, we're not here to dismantle, we're here to burn it down. Xanda Phillips, a great contemporary poet, who wrote that, and that's a line that has stuck with me forever. But going back to that book that I was just saying, in Annie Fitch's book on form, Marilyn Nelson talks about that what if we don't throw out the whole house and like what's left. And I think that kind of gets at what you're talking about, Jason, and what you're talking about, Ron, about like the kind of surprise that if we stick with some of these things, there might be this problematic house of America or this canon that we have. There might be some of these beautiful things that we can still get and still use. And I like that idea, that Nelson talks about owning the masters. And, it's kind of like that Houston Baker idea of, deformation of form versus mastery of form, and this kind of negotiation between those kind of things. But I just felt like, especially, with the person from the audience talking about Mackey's work, that it would be remiss for us not to bring up that quote from Lord, because, again, I think the double trio, from what I understand, is, again, trying to show that we can make meaning outside the master's house, right? So it's a dismantling that ends up happening with that. So I think that that's an important point, that, again, if I wouldn't feel right being the person I am if I didn't say that quote out loud while we were talking about form today.
And it has everything to do with who's centered. It has everything to do with who's kind of centered in the classroom. And so if only the people who are minoritized are expected to stay with the unfamiliar until they get it, then that's not going to work. That everyone, that the people who are dominant need to be taught to stay with until they reach that other side. That who's teaching and who's doing that teaching, and who's centered and who's in the classroom makes a huge difference.
So succinct. You're so smart. So succinct. All I did was write down, like, when you look at your students' notes and like you want to laugh at them. So if the teacher looked at my notes, it just says who's centered. So I'm going to look back at that. And that was like this genius moment. I'm going to look back at that 3 days from now when I'm journaling and trying to write a poem and be like, who's centered? Okay.
So we're coming up on time. Do you have any last comments? Did you want me to ask a last question?
I'll say this as a last comment, and it's tangential, I guess. But there's I forget who the author of this poem was, but it was in the poem. Some young man is asked, and this goes back in time a bit, whether he prefers radio or television. And the young man said he prefers radio because the pictures are better. That's why I love poetry, because the pictures are better.
I love that.
Yeah.
The only thing that I'll add is, I feel really remiss, especially because we got one question and it was a really good one, like that if that audience member felt good, did they want us to talk any more about the double trio, or did that feel like attended to and seen?
I'm not sure we can get
I thought that maybe
real time.
Oh, okay, no worries. Because I can talk about more, but yeah.
I'll open the... I'm sort of trying to hold open the space so that if because it's being relayed through the Facebook page to us, so there's sort of like a little bit of a gap there. But I hope that person would feel comfortable reaching out to us. We're very available.
No follow up. Okay. I think she said, "Oh, perfect,
okay.
perfect."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Do you want to say anything in closing? Do you want to closing statements? Yeah.
No, and I feel like this is like, like that this is going to be my mic drop that I have to illuminate and be so incredible right now. But luckily, Ron gets to talk after me, so Ron can do that part. Ron, a BD. No, Ron, you will definitely talk last. You are the OG. You will talk last. I will not talk last right now. What I'll just say is I think one of the most exciting things about teaching form for me is that it lets students know that they're participating in a community. And within my whole pedagogy, it's all about that we're like on this team working together, that we're trying these forms together, that we're unpackaging these poems and these stories together. So it's just another aspect in community. And I think the other thing that I guess my kind of suspicion with form is like I'm still a little tripping about that duration and pitch stuff. I think that bars out a lot of communities. So that's one of the things that like I still, no matter, even though I know form can do so much as far as expanding and enlarging and emancipating through the constraints, that's the thing that I still kind of set with, is I think that teaches a certain kind of English like you were so able to be able to mimic. And I don't know if we need to bow down at that altar forever.
Well, thank you both so much. I mean, one of the questions I was going to ask that I actually think we did hit on is sort of where you see the gaps between what you kind of read about form and what your experience of form is. But mine is always, the people who say like, well, it felt like it needed to be a villanelle. And I'm like, it's never happened to me. Never once had a poem that was like, I need to be a villanelle. Like, if I read a villanelle, I read a villanelle. But thank you so much. And I do just want to say that one of the things that I thought that was really beautiful that came out of this conversation is how much what form means has changed over time. And that sort of the most recent kind of form wars with the sort of new formalism were very, very different terms. And I think that what we were talking about today is that form has kind of really come to be a communal effort, that form has kind of become a way for a community to be together on the same terms. And I think I can't think of a time, I feel like most of the conversations that I have about form kind of begin with the idea that it's something elitist and exclusive. And it was really wonderful to be part of a conversation where form became something really inclusive and something about building community. So thank you both so much. And I will send us back to Monica and Toby.
Thank you guys so much. That was incredible. I could listen to you talk forever. You guys are amazing and such a great lineup to end this series on. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. See you at the end. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Don't forget to pick up the books by these incredible poets from the link in the chat. This concludes this season of the Red Hen Press Reading and Conversation Series. We are hard at work planning next season already, which will premiere sometime in August. Until then, make sure you're following us on social media and signed up for our newsletter to stay up to date on everything Red Hen. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you again soon.
Bye.